I do Qigong. My first exposure to Qigong was when I was about 10 years old. I had a lot of health issues when I was growing up. Serious health issues. I was in and out of hospital all the time. The normal Western medical system wasn't making a lot of progress. As I was having these conversations with people, they would say, Qigong has been life-changing for me. Then I'd talk to someone else and they'd say, Qigong has been life-changing. When we have an emotion, people can have the tendency to think of an emotion like it's in our head. That's not an emotion, that's a thought. Emotions are something that go deeper than that. Emotions are actually experienced. Now, our mind plays a role in the emotions we have. Absolutely. How we think affects our emotions in a big way. But the emotion itself is actually experienced inside our.
Anything that we can do to better ourselves, to better our bodies are the temple. If we don't take care of our bodies, then who else will? How can we expect to care for others?
The health part's valuable, the performance or martial arts parts are valuable. But the part that really stands out to me most is the way it gives me this greater understanding of myself and the world around me. It gives me lens or perspective on my experience of life, a way to understand things.
Welcome to Rosabel Unscripted, the podcast where authenticity meets real life stories. I'm your host, Rosabel Zohfeld, and in each episode, I dive into unscripted conversations about personal growth, life challenges, and the experiences that shaped us. From heart-to-heart chats with inspiring guests to raw moments of self-discovery, I am here to share stories that connect us all. Whether you're seeking motivation, healing, or simply a dose of real talk, you are in the right place. So get comfortable, tune in, and join me on this journey of transformation, empowerment, and meaningful conversations. This is Rosabel Unscripted. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Rosabel Unscripted podcast. Thank you for being here. Today, I have John Munro. Hi, John. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you here as well. John, he is the founder of Long White Cloud Qigong, the international Qigong school with over 450 instructors worldwide. So, John, tell me more about what you do.
Yeah, sure. So, I do Qigong. That's what I do. And in terms of the nature of how I teach Qigong at the moment, mainly my focus is training instructors. I do sometimes offer practices just for people who are starting or interested, and certainly we have a number of resources for people who are just getting started doing Qigong that people might be interested in. But my main focus is training instructors, and that's why we have this network of over 450 Qigong instructors all over the world.
How long have you been doing this? For how long?
So Qigong, I'll tell you a little bit of how I started with Qigong. My first exposure to Qigong was when I was about 10 years old. And I had a lot of health issues when I was growing up, serious health issues. I was in and out of hospital all the time. And my mother really wanted to help me overcome these health issues, and the normal Western medical system wasn't making a lot of progress. And so she studied to become a naturopath, so she could learn more about how she could help me regain my health. And not only that, she did go on to have a successful practice as well. So it wasn't all about me. That was a big part of her motivation. And when she was studying at naturopathic college, as well as their core subjects, they would also have guest lecturers come in from time to time and teach them just a little bit about a wide range of different natural health practices, so that they would know what was out there that they might want to recommend to their clients. And so one person who came in was a Qigong teacher and taught them just a little bit of Qigong. And my mother thought that was fascinating, so she came home and taught all of her kids, me being the youngest. And I also thought it was fascinating. And so, again, it was just a few exercises. But growing up, I continued to play with those few exercises. I thought they were really, really interesting. So then as a young adult, I came into contact with the same person who had taught her at naturopathic college. And I asked him if he was still teaching Qigong and if he would teach me. And he said, yes, but I'd have to study Chinese medicine as well. And so it was rather a big commitment. It wasn't easy to find Qigong back then. You had to really search. And so I was interested enough that I was like, yep, all right, I'll sign up. I'll study Chinese medicine. I'll study Qigong. And so that was how I got started.
Thank you so much for taking us, back to how you started. But for those who never heard, because, of the word Qigong, what is it?
So Qigong it's one word, but it's made up of two parts. And one of those parts a lot of people are familiar with now. So Qi, a lot of people have heard of Qi, and Qi meaning energy. The Gong part people maybe aren't so familiar with, but the Gong means work or skill. So Qigong includes all of the different ways we can work with our energy and develop skill with our energy. So it does incorporate a wide range of different practices. The fundamental tools that are used primarily within those practices are our mind, our body, and our breath as a way that we can connect to our energy and develop skill with it. So the practice of Qigong comes from China. To be fair, really every ancient culture everywhere in the world had something like this. They may not have called it the same name, they may have had different ways that they work with the energy, but they all had a concept of our living energy and that it was a useful thing to be aware of it and use it. The Chinese called it Qigong, and they developed it into quite a sophisticated way of understanding with many different methods that we could work with. In fact, it's the foundation of Chinese medicine and all of the different practices associated with that, because all Chinese medicine is focusing on all the different ways our energy flows and making it healthy. Qigong are the practices that we can do for ourselves to maintain that health without necessarily having someone else, stick needles in us, or it takes strange tasting herbal formulas or things like that.
Yes, that takes me to, and correct me if I'm wrong, but like I mentioned to you earlier, I did practice martial arts when I was in my younger years. And I learned a little bit about Qigong. And so one of the things that always caught my attention when it comes to Qigong is the fact that you can be as old as 96, 100 years old. It's a practice that literally anybody at any stage of life can actually practice. And in fact, it is well known. There are some studies that show that Qigong actually helps with longevity and so on. You did mention, talking about health issues, you mentioned that you were having some issues. So tell me a little bit more about that. What are some health issues that perhaps Qigong can help with?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'll tell you about the issues that I had when I was growing up, and then I'll talk more broadly about the sort of things it can help with. So for me specifically, I had a range of different health issues, to be fair, but the main ones were relating to my lungs. I had asthma. I would get recurring bronchitis, pneumonia, collapsed lungs, which would send me into hospital and things like that. And I did a lot through the things that my mother introduced to me to help heal and strengthen my lungs. A wide range of different things helped, but even after all that, they still weren't all the way recovered. And Qigong helped me to fully recover the health of my lungs. And of course, our breathing affects everything in our life, so it's pretty fundamental. More broadly, in terms of the different sorts of things that Qigong can help with, it really does cover the whole spectrum because our energy is fundamental to every aspect of our health. One of the things just recently that I've done is, so prior to COVID, I used to travel quite a lot and I would teach workshops, different parts of the world, and run some retreats and things like that. But then over the COVID period and after that, I wasn't able to travel for a period of time. And so I was just stuck in New Zealand for 4 years, actually. And so I hadn't been out there in the world meeting with people for a while. And last year was the first year that I finally got out and I traveled around a bit and I taught some workshops and attended a conference and things like that. And so because of this, I came into contact with quite a few people who I had had contact with online over the previous years, but we hadn't met in person. And so when we first met in person, as we had that first conversation, naturally they told me about their experience with Qigong because that was how they knew me, And again, as I was having these conversations with people, I heard the exact same words. And so as they were saying how Qigong had affected them, they would say, Qigong has been life-changing for me. And then I'd talk to someone else and they'd say, Qigong has been life-changing. And then the next person, they'd say, life-changing. And it really struck me as like, wow, everyone, like they're using this same phrase. And as I thought about it, this is really nice that I'm hearing all these stories about how Qigong has helped people, but I'm probably not the most valuable person to hear these stories. because I already know how life-changing Qigong can be. And so what we did was we put a call out to our community and said, look, has Qigong been life-changing for you? If so, if you have a story, send it in. And we compiled it into a book, which we then released at the end of last year. And so it's called Life-Changing Qigong. And so as part of putting that book together, of course, I had read through all these experiences that people sent in and how it had impacted them in different ways. And again, it really covers the spectrum. Everything from, for some people, really, they come to Qigong just as a form of gentle exercise. And that in itself is a valuable thing for them. Other people, certainly different significant health issues that it's helped them to overcome. And again, right across the spectrum of all the different health issues you can imagine that it's helped them with. But then other things that you might not think of straight away. So there were several people who talked about how Qigong has helped them in overcoming addiction. And so really it can be so valuable for so many different aspects of our lives.
Wow, that is exactly that. That's another thing, a question that I had, like how it can also help your emotions or, other things such as depression, anxiety. Because I have a good friend who has practiced Qigong, and it's kind of interesting because whenever I'll call and I say, hey, I'm feeling, he goes like, have you done Qigong yet? It's like, oh, yeah, thanks for reminding me. But he has used it for mobility, and he can swear that it has helped his arthritis and also his wife. So I was like, okay, so he's the one who always reminds me, because that was part of the practice when I was doing Kung Fu many, many years ago.
Yeah. Look,
So, yeah.
absolutely. I mean, there's very straightforward things like mobility, keeping our body moving. It's a gentle way that you can do it without causing more injury sometimes. We get too enthusiastic about some type of exercise and we can actually hurt ourselves more. Most of the practices are very gentle, so they're a great way to improve the health without giving ourselves any undue risk. Talking particularly about emotions, now there's a few different aspects to this because just generally getting our energy flowing better is going to be helpful for us. But there are aspects of our emotions that we get some really valuable insights into, specifically from Chinese medicine and then the Qigong connected to that. And this is when we have an emotion, sometimes people can have the tendency to think of an emotion like it's in our head. That's not an emotion, that's a thought. Emotions are something that go deeper than that. Emotions are actually experienced. Now, our mind plays a role in the emotions we have. Absolutely. How we think affects our emotions in a big way. But the emotion itself is actually experienced inside our body. And it is our body's response to what we're experiencing in the world around us and how we think about it. But it's experienced in the body. And as we have those emotions, different organs have to respond in different ways to respond to that emotion. And then we release different hormones and things like that. So Chinese medicine recognizes the connection between different specific emotions and different organs. And when we do different Qigong practices, we can do different practices that work with the organs and with the meridians to help to release any of that energy. You've probably heard of emotions described as, so the E in front being energy, and motion. That energy is supposed to move. And all of our emotions can be healthy when they are moving, when they're flowing, when they're in balance. There's no such thing as just a bad emotion. They become a problem when they're too intense, too extreme. That can cause problems, or when they get stuck. And they can quite literally get stuck with intention and patterns in our organs. And they keep responding as if we're, responding to something in our environment, even when we don't need to. Different Qigong practices that we can do help to release that blocked energy and move it through so that we come back into harmony. We let that energy get into motion again and flow rather than being stuck and held within us.
Like I remember, imagine I have a ball in my hands and moving it, and then you give it different colors. And so, yeah, I remember those particulars. So it helps so much, relax and in so many ways. I am so thankful for having this conversation. So talking about the book, right? So basically what you're telling me, so you have written other books, right?
Yes.
And they're related to Qigong?
Yeah, so, well, yes, all the books I've written relate to Qigong, except for one. I did very early on, it was kind of a test run. I wrote a book about self-defense because I was teaching a lot of Kung Fu at the time as well. And so I thought, okay, I'll write one on self-defense. And then I started writing some about Qigong. So I've written 5 books on Qigong. 4 of them are on specific sets of Qigong practices, and they describe how to do the practices as well as all of the fundamental principles behind them. So they're really quite how-to sort of books. And then this most recent one, this life-changing Qigong, it's not so much that I wrote it. I did write some sections of it, sort of introducing things and so on, but it's more I compiled it. I put it together from all of these people's experiences.
So it's like a community effort, and that is pretty cool.
It really is. And in fact, we're going to donate all of the proceeds to charity as well. We actually haven't decided which charity yet because things have been very busy. But that's the thing, any profit that comes from it, we're going to find a suitable charity and donate that to it because it really is, it's a community effort. And it's really about just spreading how positive Qigong can be. And not just the Qigong that I teach either. Of course, a lot of the people who share their stories have a lot of experience with Long White Cloud Qigong because that's how I know them. But some of them are also sharing experiences from other types of Qigong that they've practiced as well. And it's really just helping people to discover how much value they can find in the practice in Qigong for themselves.
So there are different Qigong practices. What are the
Thousands.
variations? Oh, thousands,
Yeah.
huh?
Literally thousands. Now, again, there's so many different ways we can work with our energy. One analogy that I often use in describing Qigong practices is food. There's a lot of things that are quite useful in there in terms of the different ways, like different foods are good for us for different reasons. And also in terms of how you prepare different dishes, sometimes you can put them together in different ways. And so if you understand the ingredients, then, you can be more flexible in the way that you use them. And really within food, we get this great diversity as well. And so, I mean, that's a useful thing, I think, to understand in terms of just how much diversity there is in Qigong, because if you try one type of Qigong, sometimes people have a tendency to think, okay, I've tried this one type of Qigong, that's it. Well, you might have tried a particularly spicy version of Qigong, or you might not have been the type that's best suited to you. And so it's really quite nice to be able to try a few different types. If there's one type and you don't like it, there's bound to be another one that you really do. It's great to understand that diversity. If we want to narrow down sort of to put some categories of Qigong practice in, we can categorize them. One way that we can categorize them is according to their historical application, the sort of things they were focused on. And Qigong was historically focused on 3 main applications. One of those was health and well-being. And it did that in a couple of ways. One, doing practices just to make yourself well, but then also as you develop an awareness and understanding and skill with your energy, you are able to apply that actually to help other people with their health as well. So as a form of treatment. The second historical application, we've already talked about this a little bit, was to martial arts. And of course, again, you could do it using practices to make yourself stronger, more resilient, faster, better reactions, all of those sorts of things. And of course, again, there was a second side to that as well, which was understanding how you could undermine the well-being of someone else, in a combat sort of context. And then the third historical application was actually many different spiritual groups or religions used Qigong within their practices. And I think it's important to understand that that doesn't mean that Qigong itself is a religion. It's certainly not. It's principles and understanding that we can apply to all these different areas. But people within these spiritual groups and religions found that because within Qigong, we naturally develop a nuanced, subtle understanding of ourselves, our understanding of our connection with the world around us, our relationships with others, this level of internal awareness that we develop was very helpful in developing a broader perspective of life and understanding our place within the world in a spiritual context. And so it's been applied in those areas as well. And so there are different Qigong practices that focus more towards one of these purposes or another. Often there's a crossover in that the same practice can be useful for all of those applications, but sometimes that application will be shaped by its purpose.
Wow. And the other question I had is regarding to that. So does Qigong, because you mentioned earlier breath work, so does Qigong includes breath work and meditation, or how are they related?
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, I mentioned that there are three primary tools that are used within most Qigong practices: mind, body, and breath. Within many Qigong practices, these are all integrated together into the same practice. Again, there's so many different practices, so you can't say, oh, they're all like this or they're all like that. But the most common types of Qigong practices will either involve standing in different postures or moving in a slow, gentle way, again, generally in a standing position, and moving the body in different ways. And as we do that, we're coordinating our breath with the movement. So we are working with our breath as we do that. And we're also using our mind to be aware of what's going on within our body and also to guide what's going on within our body and directing the energy and its flow. Having said that, again, with so much diversity, there are also practices that focus much more just on one of those parts. So there are certainly practices where you might be seated and primarily just using the mind as a type of meditation to work with your energy. Equally, there are also many simple breathing practices where we're not moving, we're not, doing anything else, but we're focusing just on working with the breath as a way to connect to and work with our energy as well.
Wow, it's beautiful work. Anything that we can do to better ourselves, to better our bodies, because our bodies are the temple, right? If we don't take care of our bodies, then who else will? I mean, how can we expect to care for others? I mean, that's one thing I always say. So what's next for you, John? I mean, do you have any are you envisioning any new I know you're trying to perhaps set what would you say about going in for the charity for the book? Do you have any other projects coming up?
Yeah, well, there's one that is sort of part way through, almost on its way to fruition. So at the moment, through Long White Cloud Qigong, we teach three different certification programs. Again, this is for people who want to get really deep into Qigong, focused on each of those three areas that I just talked about of Qigong application. Another which is focused more, it's not necessarily for martial arts application, but on the more dynamic, physically challenging types of Qigong that can apply to martial arts, but can apply just to not just being well, but leading to a sort of a higher level of performance. And then one which is practices and the principles that connect more to a philosophical understanding of the world and of our energy and so on. And so we have these three programs that we've been running for some time, and we have just started to run a program focused on applying Qigong specifically as a healing modality. And so we have the first group going through the first part of that now, which is really exciting. And yeah, so it's got a little ways to go, but it's such a valuable thing. I mean, Qigong is so valuable for ourselves, just as a practice for ourselves. But to be able to help someone when they have some things that go on within us are quite challenging, and some things we can address just by working with our mind, and other things we can address just by working with our body, through what we eat and exercises and things like that. And some things sit somewhere in between that. Our mind is involved, our body is involved, and working with our energy is often an effective way to address these more complex things that we may be experiencing. And so to be able to, again, this is something I've done for myself for a long time through my own clinical practice, working with people and giving them a Qigong healing as a treatment. But to be able to now train others to also be able to do that is something I'm quite excited about, to have more people able to offer that around the world.
And in general, how long does it take for someone to complete a program, depending on at least where
Yeah, sure.
expectation?
So the courses that we run are 15-week, 200-hour courses. So they're quite compact in a way. It allows people to focus really strongly for a set period of time. It gives them enough time to really absorb all of the principles, and not only that, to be doing their own regular practice right throughout that time. So they develop their own experiential understanding of all of the practices and how the principles relate to them. The courses are also very interactive. We have weekly Q&A sessions. We have group practice sessions every week. We have one-on-one sessions where people are getting individual feedback. So people get this really structured understanding that allows them to, develop that understanding in a relatively short amount of time because it's focused, it's structured, there's lots of feedback, and they generally come out at the end of one of those courses feeling very confident, having experienced a lot for themselves and very confident in their ability to be able to share that with other people as well.
And how many hours a day? What's the time that you recommend for someone to at least be able to feel that confidence?
Yeah, right. So, yes, it's going to depend on what you're wanting to get from your Qigong practice. So, someone who's just wanting to do Qigong for themselves, even just doing 10 or 20 minutes a day, you can get a lot of benefit. When people are doing these courses across 15 weeks, around about 4 months, we recommend about an hour and a half a day of practice, and then they're doing additional study to fill in all of the theory and principles as well. So there's a bit of a challenge to fit that into a busy schedule to be able to put that much practice in and the additional study. But for most people, if you really want to do it, it's something that people can fit in, even if they're busy working at something else. They can fit in. They just need to have that concentrated period of dedicated study and practice. And then they gain this great foundation that will support them afterwards. So a lot of people do those courses because they specifically want to teach. A lot of people also do it just because they want to do a deep dive for themselves. They want to really gain a really solid understanding of the principles and the practices so they have a great foundation for their own practice.
Wow. Can you share one of those? Do you have any stories of students that you were like, okay, this is a great story to share, like how Qigong helped them in a very particular way?
Oh, there's so many of them. It's sort of hard to go, okay, where can I pick just one? But certainly some of the ones that really stood out to me was, and I did mention this before, some who mentioned how it's helped them with addiction, because it's not something that you often immediately think of. Now, one of those stories that I think of, it wasn't necessarily like it was a terrible addiction that was causing massive, massive problems in their life, but it was just they recognized that alcohol wasn't doing them good, and it wasn't something that was, they wasn't playing the role that they wanted to in their life, and Qigong helped them to stop that. So that was positive. Another story, it was much more extreme. We're talking in and out of jail and all of that sort of thing. And again, Qigong was part of how they were able to move beyond all of that. So those really, really stand out to me. Some of the students I know, the impact of Qigong has essentially affected their life purpose. Where having discovered Qigong and how much of an impact it's had directly on them, they have then decided to really focus on this and teach others. And it's become their career. It's been the main thing that they focus on in their life. Same for me, and that's also a powerful thing in a different way, where it's given them this new purpose and focus and drive and motivation within their lives.
So it's become like a sort of a discipline because it has discipline in it's something that you have to be.
Yeah, so there is a discipline in terms of practicing regularly and so on. I don't often think of it so much of a discipline though, because it's really self-care. But yes, you want to have a routine to do that effectively. For me, back to my own journey with Qigong, my start was very much focused on the health and well-being. That's, right from the earliest, when my mother showed me some when I was about 10 years old. And then when I studied it in conjunction with Chinese medicine, it was very much focused on that. And then I did clinical practice for quite a few years. And that was really my main focus. My first Qigong teacher, of course, I've had others since then, but my first Qigong teacher was the Grand Master of a Kung Fu system. And so I thought, well, you know what? I've done all this study on the medical side and the health side. Maybe it would be a good idea for me to do the Kung Fu as well. Maybe that would give me some more perspective. And so I did. And it did give me a lot more perspective. It was very valuable to come at it from a different angle. And so as a result of that, I ended up teaching Kung Fu for quite a long time when I had my own Kung Fu studio and I was teaching. And so that was a sort of a natural development for me to move from the health to the more high performance and the focus within the martial arts. And then coming out of that, naturally for myself, there has been this progression more into the more philosophical aspects of Qigong. And for me at this stage, all of the areas are valuable. The health part's valuable, the performance or martial arts parts are valuable. But the part that really stands out to me most is the way it gives me this greater understanding of myself and of the world around me and so on. Mainly, I think of it as it gives me a lens or perspective on my experience of life. And it
Do
gives me
you
a way to understand things and shapes that.
do you think it is a way of life for you?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And it comes from that understanding. Naturally, from that understanding flows what I choose to do with my time,
Right.
how, what I choose to eat, how I choose to interact with people and so on.
Very good. Like I said, I am not gonna say that I was a student of Qigong myself, but for a whole year I immersed myself under a kung fu practice under a master. And so at that time, at least at that time, it was a way of life. And we grow up, we move, things happen. But I will tell you this, it becomes such a discipline that many times when I cannot do anything else, I just go back to do my forms and do things of that. And sometimes I feel the exercises that I've learned. But in my case, not so much necessarily for health. It's very interesting. Perhaps as a way of finding myself, maybe more of a mind type of a meditation. Let's put it that way. A way to
Reconnecting to yourself.
Exactly. Because I have so many good memories of that practice I used to do. It's like I'm talking 20 years ago or so. It was right at that cutoff when I was between 19 and 20 years of age. My perspective just kind of opened up in so many ways. Because that's why I mentioned the word discipline, because to me at the time, that's what it was.
That's what you needed, yeah.
Helped me tremendously at the time. I was living in that school for like a whole entire year. And all I did was to practice every single day until I got my black belt. So it was good. I wish I would have continued. And I still have friends in there, but life happens and we move on to different things. It's incredible. Is there anything I have not asked you that you'd be like, I really want to get this out there. I want to share with people, with the listeners?
No, I think we've covered, given people at least a little bit of a basic understanding of Qigong. I guess one thing because as you mentioned earlier on, a lot of people might not be familiar with Qigong.
Right.
It's something that more and more people are learning about. Awareness of Qigong has grown so much over recent years, but still not that many people know about. And so some people might be curious about, well, how can they make a start? Do you have to study Chinese medicine as well, like I did, or go to a kung fu school and spend a year there like you did? There's lots of simple ways you can make a start. It doesn't have to be that big of a commitment. It can be something that can be a small thing that supports you in other aspects of your life. And it can be really simple. There's lots of videos on YouTube, for example, that you can make a start with, and you can find one that you like and just practice. And again, it could be as little as 10 minutes a day or something, or 15 or 20, what fits for you. You can get a huge amount of benefit from that. At Long White Cloud Qigong, we've got some great resources along those lines. We do have a bunch of free videos that you can find on our website of just different practices you can follow along with. We also have some just short courses that are free. Again, that can give people a good overview and understanding so they know what they're doing and they understand the principles if they think that it's something they'd like to explore more. So we have one which is called Introduction to Qigong Theory and Practice in the context of examples of the principles. So you can do some practices where you can really understand the principles that are behind Qigong practice. I recommend to everyone if they're interested in Qigong so they can get a good understanding as they get started. And then there's another one that we have, which is called The Complete Natural Breath, which is, again, it's a free course and it's basics of starting to develop skill with your breath so that you can breathe more freely, more easily. And again, really helps with other Qigong practice, but also just really helps in your day-to-day life as well. So those might be resources that people might be interested in.
So where people have to just go to your website, remind us again.
That's the best way to find me or find any of those resources. If you go to Long White Cloud Qigong. Now, the Qigong, you might need help spelling. Long White Cloud, that should all be easy enough. But the Qigong is spelled Qigong. So it's Long White Cloud Qigong, breathwork.com, and you can find your way around. You can find all sorts of resources on there.
Are you on social media?
Absolutely. Again, if you look for Long White Cloud Qigong, you'll find us on Instagram, on Facebook. Those are the main ones that we use, Instagram and Facebook. YouTube as well. You'll find us on YouTube as well.
Long White Cloud. Yeah, it reminds me of the name of my school. The school was the White Dragon.
Nice. Yeah, nice. Very cool.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, inspiration. I mean, it is very inspirational for sure. Like I say, I know a lot of people will definitely be interested in looking for those resources, especially anything that's out there that help us to live better lives for sure. Thank you so much, John, for being here with us, for taking the time to share.
Great. Thanks, Rosabel. It's been a pleasure.
Awesome. Thank you. Everybody out there, please go to John's, to the website, to Long White Cloud Qigong, or Qigong, which is Qigong, and check out those free resources. Don't forget to subscribe to the Rosabel Unscripted podcast, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, everybody. If you enjoyed this episode of Rosabel Unscripted Podcast, here's how you can support our show. Visit www.rosabelzohfeld.com to learn more about my work, subscribe to my newsletter, and get updates on upcoming episodes. Head over to my YouTube channel, hit the subscribe button, and turn on notifications. Your subscription not only motivates me to keep creating, but also helps others discover these conversations. Share this episode with a friend or colleague. I want to invite you, yes, you listening right now, to check out my book, The Courage to Succeed, A True American Dream. It is available now on Amazon and also Barnes & Noble. This is a story of resilience, grit, and what it really means to chase your dreams, even when the odds are stacked against you. If you ever face fear, failure, or uncertainty, this book will meet you right there and remind you that courage always has a voice. To search The Courage to Succeed, A True American Dream by Rosabel Zohfeld on Amazon, or head to the link in the show notes, because your dream is worth it and your courage can take you there.